Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the HGLRC KT20, which this has kind of been marketed as a go-kart drone. I don't know what market segment that is, but it's kind of a sin-whoopy sort of 2-incher quad. Let's do something different today. Yeah, we're going to jump right into the flight footage. No specs, we'll do that during the flight. So this is our slow cruisy flight. You can see that tree is blowing around pretty good. This is one of several flights, and we're going to get up to it to the rough start there with a big bump or a big hop and then a bump off that stick. I've got the Insta360 Go, and as per my usual, you can see a little bit of my camera protection. One of the reasons why my Insta360 Go is still in good shape is I have that extra lens protection on my mount. So this one, 4S, is the battery that I'm running on this, and it's 650 milliamp. And for a slow cruisy flight, that works just fine. It's got a power switchable VTX up to 350 milliwatts. That's the Zeus Nano. It's got the Zeus 10 all-in-one flight controller, which is 2 to 6S compatible. And it's got Aeolus 1303.5 4500 kV motors on that. The motors are also rated from 3 to 4S. You certainly wouldn't want to fly this on 3S, I don't think. I think you're going to want every cell that you can get out of that. It's got Emax Devon quad-bladed props on it as well. And in my configuration with a 650 milliamp battery and the HD camera of the Insta360 Go 2, the mount or the screw that's required for the mount, our weight comes in at 199.33 grams, or 33 grams. And then we drop to the faster flight, which will be a little bit later here. In that configuration, I found I needed to use a 450 milliamp battery in order to be able to do hard turns effectively. Otherwise, it just didn't have the thrust or the power to reverse its direction very well at all. And with that 450 milliamp 4S battery and the Insta360 Go 2 and the mount and the screw required for the mount, I get 175 grams on my scale, so well under 250 grams. And I think what this one's going to do, and do, I guess, well, is be a 2-inch sin whoop that can carry a camera like an Insta360 Go 2 or even a naked GoPro if you happen to have one of those. And you're going to be able to fly it faster than maybe others. And I say maybe because it depends on what you compare it to. I don't think I have flown one like this with a 2-inch prop, a sin whoop with a 2-inch prop. I think in the past, of all the quad reviews I've done, I think the 2.5-inch prop was the smallest we got with something that was fully prop protected. Of course, this is a pusher as well, and they are running props out in this configuration. They do have a capacitor here on the battery lead, and we have some LED lights across the back, which is fun. And the FPV camera, which I failed to mention, is the Caddx Ant. So this is the analog configuration. They do have an HD configuration, but I would only suggest that HD configuration if you're not planning to carry an external HD camera. I think if you get the digital version, you should plan to use that digital footage that you get out of the Polar Vista, I think in this case, to get your footage that you're looking for. It has a single carbon fiber plate that the motors and everything mounts to, and that is a 2mm thick. And mine is the FR Sky version, so I have got an RXSR receiver tucked up in there. So that's kind of the specs. That's what I wanted to do different, was just jump into the flight footage so you can see it. Of course, the Insta360 Go 2 does its own sort of stabilization. This flight on the 650 milliamp battery goes on for 5 minutes and 7 seconds. So you do get, for something with 2-inch props carrying a 650 milliamp battery, you do get pretty decent flight time. So it's a pretty good mix of efficiency there with carrying all that weight on a pretty small prop. Can't complain about that too much if this is the sort of quad that you're looking for. I think we've seen a fair bit of my slow cruisy flights, so you know that when it comes to the slow cruisy flights, it's not really my forte. And so what I tend to do is cut that flight short. Again, it goes on for 5 minutes and 7 seconds in total, not an additional 5 minutes and 7 seconds. That's the total flight time. Oh, and that's a Kart battery. It's one of the few 650 milliamp batteries that I have that is 4S. I have others, but I just don't find they hold voltage very well. So when it comes to the demand of thrust, carrying much weight, The more elongated batteries, they're a lot lighter, but they just don't hold voltage very well, so I end up with shorter flight times. So that's the reason why I went with that Kart battery, which is more traditional and rectangle shape. Let's jump into our faster flight. This is actually the same day. You could tell by that wind blowing that pine tree in front of us, one of the few trees that has anything left on the branches. So I spent quite a bit of time, even though this is the same day as that flight, I spent quite a bit of time exploring batteries and exploring how aggressively you could fly this one. I suspect because they kind of market it as this go-kart sort of quad, that they're kind of pushing this in the direction of indoor, which doesn't fit what I'm doing necessarily. So if you were to be somewhere that's indoor and you're wanting to do faster chase footage, say of an indoor go-kart track, then this is kind of me trying to simulate that sort of flight. It can do flips, it can do rolls, it can do dives. It handles those things just fine, although it doesn't handle any of those things well. There's some bounce back in the tune as far as flips and rolls go, and it felt a little loose when it came to doing dives. Also, the recovery with all the weight and the small 2-inch prop, recovery on dives, there's quite a bit of technique there. You don't have a lot of thrust left over to come out of that dive, so you have to pull out a little bit earlier and you have to go a little bit harder on the throttle in order to not bottom out and hit the deck when you're doing those dives. So I really think what this does for a 2-inch prop that is completely prop protected is it does flat, more aggressive flying, although it doesn't do racing sort of style flying. You know, hard 180 turns when you're going at speed, it just doesn't do very well. You need to have kind of gradual turns, as I'm trying to display here. I did plenty of tests with different kinds of turns, and this is what I found would do it well. This flight, again, is on a 450 milliamp 4S battery, and it goes on for about 2.5 minutes. So your flight time comes way down. Of course, I'm using a smaller battery than in the first flight, but if you use the larger battery, I didn't find I got much more flight time, but I had far more difficulties keeping it in the air, not crashing. Even when you're yawing around and you're coordinating your turn, when you're yawing around something, I found that with all that weight, it would just come down so quickly that I would have a really hard time keeping it out of the grass. That's why I dropped the battery size down, so I can get the weight down, so I could try to manage with the available thrust that we have. Of course, that means that the flight time comes down. Doesn't mean that you have to do what I do, but in my experience, if you're trying to fly this harder, faster, probably need to decrease your battery size and just bring more batteries with you. This is our FPV view out of the Caddx Ant. You can still see we've got quite a bit of wind. Unfortunately, we've had a number of those days. Every time I go out, it's pretty rare I get dead, stiff, calm winds. But this is a different sort of flight, and I wanted to show you this because it displays some of the things I talked about, that even with a smaller 450 milliamp battery, which is what I'm running on this, flying it aggressively and doing very many maneuvers that aren't flat, it requires a lot of technique. Like I said, it took some practice. I had to try a bunch of different times, and I ended up crashing it quite a bit. Most of my crashes were just me hitting the ground, not nose first necessarily, but not able to pull out of whatever maneuver I was doing, or just not having enough thrust to keep myself from crashing into the ground many times. But this also, gives you that ability to look at the camera and say, is that for me or not? Of course, like I said, in the first flight, it does come in an HD version, which would be grossly different than this. Hopefully you understand that if you go with the HD version that is running the Caddx Vista or the Air Unit Lite, I think it's now been branded, basically the DJI sort of FPV equipment that Caddx is reselling, I guess. Much different view. Of course, it requires different equipment as well. You've got to have the goggles. And potentially you might even need to have the radio unless you've already got a radio and you select the appropriate receiver in that particular case. But I wanted to show you a sample of this footage because it does show you, after flying it a number of flights and kind of learning what it could do, this is what I was able to pull off. Again, I had to use a smaller battery, and in this particular case, I don't think the battery health is great because you can see I'm just under 2 minutes. We're getting lots of low voltage warnings. So this flight doesn't even go on for 2.5 minutes. Most of my flights, with the crashes and all when I was experimenting on a 450, did get me about 2.5 minutes of flight time flying this sort of style. Okay, so I kind of changed the format there a little bit for those that are familiar with the channel. I wanted to get right into the flight footage, and I just kind of wanted to test you to see what you thought of that. I suspect most of you are wanting to go back to my old style where I show you all the tech and the specs, and I point to all the parts and tell you what everything is, and I show you the weights on the scale and everything. I don't mind that, but I wanted to throw this little test out. Let's get down to the desk. We'll go over the accessories that it comes with and some thoughts. So here's our first set of accessories. We get extra, not just an extra set of props, but as you can probably tell from this bag, there's more than just one extra set in here. There's actually two sets, but I had to use one because I banged one up real bad. So I dug one of the spare props out and put it on the quad itself. We get two sets of foam, so you don't have to go with blue, but why wouldn't you go with blue? I mean, come on. But no, you could go with yellow or you can go with black. And then we have the strips that I have left over. You do have to apply these all the way around the quad, so you have to do that yourself. You put the strips on first, and then you put the foam onto that. They're double-sided 3M sticky adhesives. We also have an extra battery strap, some extra screws. I believe these would be for your batteries, I'm guessing, but they're numbered stickers with some HGLRC logos on them. Of course, you get a manual for your receiver, and you get a manual for your Zeus 10 all-in-one flight controller, an iFly safe card, prop rotation card, quality assurance tag, and HGLRC stickers. Of course, you get Emax stickers and the previously mentioned numbered stickers with HGLRC logos. As for the design of the quad, I don't have too many complaints. One thing that I did find interesting about this particular material that they use and how they mounted it to this carbon fiber is it's pretty stiff. Actually, if I squeeze it here, watch how the camera side kind of goes up and the back end goes up. So the carbon fiber, to my feel, is actually quite stiff, and this whole thing, it gives it some rigidity, and I guess it's more flexible this way. So if we twist it, it's more flexible. But, you know, as far as your impacts go, like I said, I crashed it a number of times. I didn't have any breakages, you can see here. And oddly enough, they did this where we have some actual camera protection, which is really rare. I can't see that if you hit something hard, like say you are going through a doorway or something, if you hit the camera here, I don't know how much actual protection this would give your camera lens, but it is there, and it is, you know, it's pretty stiff as well. This entire housing is pretty stiff, as well as the little wings out here that are providing the protection. So it would probably help some, but it can't move much before you're actually going to hit the lens. You can maybe see right down here by the screw, we can move that camera back a little bit further to give ourselves more camera protection, but you might get some of this plastic in your FPV view, so you have to decide if that's something that bothers you. And they cut this out so you could get some extreme camera angle, but I think if you go much higher than, well, what I've got, your flight time's really going to be short because you're going to be all over that throttle. Then, of course, our HD camera, it goes right into this mount. That's all one molded plastic piece here. And these struts are actually also quite stiff. You know, it would have to be to give it the stiffness that I talked about. We do have a rubberized battery mat, and we've got a a right-hand circular polarized antenna. That's the HGLRC hammer, as it says right there. And they put shrink wrap around that, interestingly enough. They did mount the antenna wires for the receiver just like this. Not ideal for range, but it's fine. It keeps the antennas well out of harm's way. I can't imagine you'll have range problems with this, but, you know, that's how they mounted it, so I point that out to you. Also, the mounting around the motors in this plastic bit, see how it's kind of flush? I would say that's within 1 millimeter of actually being flush. I don't know if that's going to come through the camera. The carbon fiber sticks up just a touch. So this has got a housing that kind of cups around the carbon fiber arm. That probably helps it in some degree to give it some extra rigidity. We also have these little feet that when you land, you're not landing on your bottom carbon fiber plate, which is really just there to protect from a rock or something hitting those components. But you've got these little feet that are only on the sides, nothing on the front or on the back to protect you. So when it comes down, it lands on those. So it does provide a slight bit of clearance for your props. And then, as I mentioned, you've got this cage down here with 4 metal posts that provide some protection when you land, that you won't, you know, if a rock were to be laying there or something else, that you wouldn't be striking that rock against this stuff, you know, sort of bad luck, sort of damage to your quad. That VTX does have a microphone on it, but I did not use the audio recorded from this. You can record the audio and possibly use it. I think it's going to really sound like a dental drill or something that, you know, hurts our ears quite a bit when we listen to it, but it is there. The flight audio footage that you saw in my video so far has all been from a secondary camera that's sitting on the table near me, so that you get an idea what it sounds like as it flies around from my perspective, from the person who's flying the quad's perspective. Of course, this cage is quite sizable. You can see there's lots of empty space in there, and that's very, very likely due to the fact that this can also house that Vista in here. And I suspect, you know, we wouldn't have that VTX, so the Vista would probably mount to the bottom plate rather than mounting up through. Yeah, it's pretty much going to have to mount to this top plate, I think. That would be ideal if they did, because you do have these metal posts. Keep those components separate. So that's probably what they've done with that version. We do have self mounting up here. You can probably see that here. We've got self mounting with the red there, which helps to keep vibration from getting into our flight controller and causing additional PID tune errors. I didn't think the PID tune was especially good. I felt it was a little bit loose. You know, like I said, it has a little bit of bounce back in the flips and the rolls. Of course, this is a small prop carrying a lot of weight in the configuration that, you know, it's kind of designed for. So getting that rock stiff, I don't know. I've never tried to manually tune something like this at that weight to see how hard that is or not. I'm skeptical there, though. We do have some LEDs across the back, which is kind of an interesting little feature, to where if you were to be chasing indoors and you maybe there was multiple of these, maybe you're chasing one of these, that you would have the LED lights on the back that you could program and make them do whatever else that you want them to do if you didn't want them to do what they do have. I don't know that the foam is going to help us much. It's got this lip you can see here from the bottom, so when your foam compresses, it's like 2 or 3 millimeters before it's going to hit the plastic anyways. But the foam basically just gives you some style. It doesn't necessarily give you any actual durability or change that if you hit something, you're still going to be hitting this plastic frame against whatever you hit. And you can see mine's a bit chewed up here around the front. Some of my crashing, even though I don't think I crashed on the cement at all. I'm curious about this scoop here. See this, what I'm calling a scoop right here. I don't know if that does anything for the flight or the aerodynamics of the quad. I'm wondering if that just provides, again, some additional rigidity, maybe some additional protection, that if you do hit up here, that, you know, you've got some extra material so it won't snap off, possibly. We do have 2 screws, it looks like, mounting this top piece, so that's a good idea. They should be longer screws. Hopefully you can see that right back there. There's 2 screws that go into that piece right next to my finger. Those are the 2 screws. Looks like they had some extra wire length here. Let me get something to point with. Some extra wire length right here, so they wrapped it around this post in order to keep that wire from dangling in the props. I guess my preference would be they shorten that up a little bit, but maybe that gives you some freedom. Maybe it makes it easier to work on. Have that little extra bit of wire length. So they've also zip tied the receiver and the antenna kind of together in one little bundle, one little housing. Let me get this out of the way so we can see that a little bit better. And then it goes to this little cross brace here on the frame, the plastic part of the frame. And then we have another zip tie up here. And you can kind of see it right there. Just kind of making sure, again, the antenna and the wires stay out of our props. We don't want those things chopped up. So they did take care of those things. And the motors are soldered to this board. This board, I don't believe, comes in any configuration where it has connectors. We did use a little bit of that acetate tape, what I've been calling Emax tape for a long time. And I think it's kind of a pun or a joke or a funny little thing. I've been calling it Emax tape for so long. So it's called acetate tape. I've got it linked in all the video descriptions. There's a link to Emax's shop, and there's a link to Amazon. You can look at that and then go Google find where you want to buy it from if you want to. They did use that tape to secure the battery lead. I would prefer to have seen a zip tie there, because I don't think tape is going to have nearly as much strength in keeping this from being pulled. Of course, we've got our battery toilet tanked, what I've been calling toilet tanked, and I don't think I originated that saying either. So the battery shouldn't shift violently forward and leave the quad, especially if you have an HD camera installed on that quad. Normally we worry about the battery leaving on a forward flight. I suppose, excuse me, a forward flight crash. I suppose you could hit sideways and that would pull it this way. So there's still some potential that, if you get one, I would say you could leave the tape here. Just take a zip tie, regular old zip tie, just wrap it around there. Hunker it down a little bit to give this a little extra security, because you do not want those wires coming off this board, because if you pull the wires off the board, you probably pulled the pads, and then trying to solder to the traces that are left over after the pads have been removed is a nightmare. I've only tried it a handful of times and I have not been successful, but maybe your soldering skills are up to that task. Mine are not. So as I mentioned previously, this does come in an analog version as well as an HD version. The HD version still says it has the Caddx Polar, or you can get the new Phoenix HD Nano in this if you have the DJI goggles and you want to fly digital. The digital version seems to come in somewhere between $240 and $270-ish. The analog version, like I have here, comes in, depending upon the receiver that you choose, between $130 and $162-ish. So, is this just an indoor sin whoop and did I fly it all wrong, or is this made for outdoor flight as well? Maybe I should have posed that question earlier on in the video when more of you are still here. But anywho, if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.